thank you for having this hearing on this important subject, and it's something that strikes close to my heart and to my communities. We have several African-American inner city communities that have been the site of much industrial pollution and industrial development over the years. Recently, there was an attempt to put a pipeline from an oil company.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, Mr. Chair, somebody has to mute. Somebody is interrupting our speaker.
I think it's the mayor. If somebody would communicate that we can, I have to ask him to unmute this time. And so, if somebody would advise the mayor to unmute, I would appreciate that. Mr. Cohen, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Stauber, for making note of that. They tried to put a pipeline through a minority community, and they had the nerve to say it was the path of least resistance. The least resistance because the poor community, which happens to be African American, which had been used for so many years as places where industrial sites located that were put off lots of pollutants, and those communities had 4 times the cancer rates of any place else in the city. They hadn't had the voices to stand up. This year, in what was an historic moment with grassroots support, plus Vice President Gore, who got involved, and in my office and others, the pipeline did not go through. It was stopped. And that was wonderful, but normally that doesn't happen. And industrial pollutants go to the places of least resistance, just like it was said in that situation. There was a senator I served with, a Republican senator in Tennessee, state senator named Leonard Donovan, fine gentleman. And he used to say, he told me, which is nothing unique, the NIMBY statement, not in my backyard. And that's when I learned it. In every place, they don't want it in their backyard. And the powerful people, the wealthy people, the people that have voices because of political contributions or other powers that they might have to extend benefits and on elected officials, either during or after office, they don't get the pollutants in those areas in their neighborhoods because they've got a stronger voice. And it's gone on forever. And so we need to have this environmental justice for the future and to make up somewhat for the past. And so I appreciate this hearing. Let me ask first here, Dr. Sheets, and I appreciated your testimony. The Byhalia pipeline was a prime example of cumulative impact. Were this to be built, communities were already at greater health risk, would have had one more potential source of pollutants. How would this bill have affected the cumulative impact of projects?
Well, I think that I think it would be subjected to a cumulative impacts review application for the permit, and if that review showed that the standard is if due to cumulative impacts, standard in the EJ for All Act is that if due to cumulative impacts there is not a reasonable certainty of no harm to the community in which facility a pipeline would go through. If there's not a reasonable certainty of no harm, then the application would be denied. So there's a level of protection there through cumulative impact analysis. And
have you seen a history of plants that emit pollutants, oil or other industrial type, being put in minority communities, both white and black, throughout this country?
Well, there is, and that's the studies I referred to. Yes, there's a history of all types of polluting facilities being disproportionately cited in communities of color, and not just poor communities of color, in communities of color and low-income communities of all colors, so including low-income white communities. There's a history of that.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Khan, you're an expert on environmental justice in the context of civil rights law. Can you provide a real-world example of how the current application of the Civil Rights Act of '64 under the Supreme Court's Sandoval decision does not fully protect the rights of communities suffering from discrimination?
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. In 43 seconds, I spoke of the communities in Uniontown and Tallahassee, Alabama, in particular, both of whom have gone on more than one occasion to the EPA filing civil rights complaints about the disproportionate impact of the siting of those landfills on those historically Black communities. In particular, the Uniontown landfill holds 4 million tons of coal ash that actually were carted in from a disaster outside of the state and is now, impacting that community in a negative way, along with a cheese plant, a catfish plant, and a whole host of issues related to insufficient water and sanitation services. And so the community itself is dealing with its own set of cumulative impacts and has failed to get redress from EPA by filing complaints.
Thank you, Ms. Khan. Thank you, all the members of the committee that allowed me to go a little early. We'll submit the remainder of our questions in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Appreciate it, Mr. Cohen. Thank you.